با درود و احترام خدمت شما عزیزان طرفداران برنامه‌های پارسه، امروز هم باز درباره سخنرانی خامنه‌ای که بر علیه رضا و شاه فقید و حکومت پهلوی حرف زده که چقدر اینها ترسیدند و چقدر هراس دارند از اینکه مردم اقبالشون به سوی خانواده پهلوی است و از این جهت سعی می کنند با هوچیگری و صحبت‌های بی اساس خودشون رو توجیه کنند. در اینجا صحبت‌های کوبنده شاهزاده رضا پهلوی که در یک گفتگو با تلویزیون CBN درباره سخنان خامنه‌ای که در روز تنفیذ پزشکیان گفت و توهین افترا به خاندان پهلوی بست میتواند جوابیه‌ای باشه به علی خامنه‌ای و کسانی که خوشحال شدند از اینکه خامنه‌ای به حکومت مورد علاقه مردم توهین کرد. اما شاهزاده رضا پهلوی در گفتگوی CBN اعلام کرده که مبارزه تنها راه نجات است. ملت ایران آماده یک انقلاب هست و این میتواند پاسخی باشه به علی خامنه‌ای که تو دیگر پایان راهی و هیچ راهی جز سقوط نداری. این مصاحبه به انگلیسی است اما بد نیست، ببینید.
Well, Iran is at the heart of the conflict in the Middle East, and while its leaders support proxy wars against Israel and the West, its people are hungry for change. That's the belief of the oldest son of the late Shah of Iran. The 63-year-old crown prince told CBN's George Thomas that the current regime is weaker than ever, and the country is ripe for revolution.
Fight for freedom and liberties is a cause that never ends until it's done.
Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi is warning the United States and Western powers to not be fooled by the election of Iran's new president, Masoud Pezeshkian.
We call this the circus of elections in Iran.
At 63, Pahlavi is the regime's most vocal and prominent critic. He calls Pezeshkian a lackey, handpicked by a radical Muslim system bent on keeping Iranians in a constant state of repression and fear.
In all these years, it really didn't matter who was presented because all the shots are finally called by Khamenei, the supreme leader.
During a wide-ranging interview, the eldest son of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the last Shah of Iran, told CBN News that Iranians are clamoring for political change like never before.
The regime's own figures demonstrate that at least 73% of the population want another form of government. And I imagine the number is much higher than that because if it was an actual open polling, you would probably even have in the 90 percentile range.
In 1979, as heir to the throne, Pahlavi was in the US training to be a fighter pilot when Muslim radical leaders forced his father to relinquish the monarchy, sending the entire family into exile. Pahlavi says the aftermath led to an Islamic-run regime that would devastate his ancestral homeland, where today 60% of the people live below the poverty line.
45 years of clerical rule in the name of religion and the immediate element of persecution and the fact that our country has fallen behind in terms of being on the route towards progress, because Iran by now should have been the South Korea of the Middle East, instead it's the North Korea of the region.
Under the mullah's reign, Iran has become a leading state sponsor of terrorism and the root cause of instability in the Middle East and beyond.
It finances Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, all in its proxy wars. And of course, it's all networks of activists that they have that are doing the bidding of the regime in the outside world, even in Western capitals.
45 years after the radical Muslim clerics took over the country, His Royal Highness says that the mullahs of Tehran are weaker than ever before and have lost their legitimacy in the eyes of a majority of Iranians.
When you lose your legitimacy, whether it's religious legitimacy or political legitimacy, then you're simply holding on by sheer repression. When you have a regime that is completely delegitimized, when you have people who no longer believe in the system, even if they did at some point, and they want out, that makes these systems vulnerable.
Case in point, the 2022 nationwide protests that followed the murder of Mahsa Amini, detained by religious police for allegedly not properly wearing her mandatory hijab. Iranian security forces killed more than 500 protesters and imprisoned some 20,000 people. Pahlavi says this clearly shows Iranians are ready to sacrifice for revolution.
Nobody said that freedom comes for free. The price sometimes is extremely high. But are you willing to say that just because it's too expensive, I'm not going to purchase it and put up with what otherwise would be annihilation, demise? We don't have a choice. We have to do it. We have to do it for survival. We have to do it for sanity. We have to do it for humanity. We have to do it for our own interests, no matter what it takes.
Despite Iranian proxy attacks on U.S. troops in the Middle East, acceleration of its nuclear uranium enrichment program, and funding of Hezbollah and other terror groups, Pahlavi cannot understand why the Biden administration continues to keep billions of dollars flowing to the terror regime. He says it's time Western governments stop appeasing the mullahs of Tehran.
And what I have argued for years to foreign governments, particularly Western democracies, has been that your expectation of behavior change from the get-go was a false expectation, because you simply haven't recognized the DNA of this regime that needs to do all of it does in order to survive. It's not interested in the welfare of the Iranian people. It's simply aiming to export an ideology to dominate the whole world.
Pahlavi, who idealizes Martin Luther King Jr. and Mahatma Gandhi for their pursuit of non-violent campaigns for political change, runs the National Council of Iran, whose mission is to replace the current Islamic-led regime with a secular democracy. He wants the world to focus on supporting Iranian people rather than keep coddling the regime's thugs.
Even those who believe that maybe we could try and bring reform from within slowly but surely have given up on this idea. Look, we cannot have a religious dictatorship in the 21st century. We have to go towards a secular democracy. So that's why I think the majority of Iranians find themselves in the same optic, in the same vision.
Knowing the history that you have with your beloved nation, do you ever say, you know what, I think this is too tough a fight. Too many innocent people's lives are being taken, and it's been 45 years. Do you ever despair?
There were moments in time that I wonder if South Africans would have given up, or people in the Eastern Bloc countries would have given up, and even dissidents in the Soviet Union would have given up. I haven't heard once a dissident anywhere in the planet say, you know what, I give up. You can't give up. It's not an option. And I think Iranians, the reason why they haven't given up, the reason why they go to the streets, the reason why they take the risk to be shot in the eye or continue to be murdered by the regime is because they know that the only way out is for us to succeed. And if they have to sacrifice themselves so that future generations will, have a better life, so be it.
Thank you, sir. George Thomas, CBN News, Washington.
Well, I believe in secular democracies. I believe freedom is the oxygen of humanity. And when you have it, you have this tremendous flourishing. And we've seen that around the world. Have we given up on those ideals, though, is my question. When you look at Afghanistan and Iraq, we had plenty of opportunity to introduce that secular democracy, and we chose not to. What we did was put in a constitution based on Sharia law. And Sharia law was enshrined in their constitutions, which effectively makes them theocracies. Here's something that history ought to teach everyone, that enforced religion is no religion at all. If you have a religious dictatorship, you don't have freedom, and you don't even have religion. Here's a culture, here's a government that enforces the religious law, so it's okay to beat a woman to death because she doesn't wear her scarf right. If you protest the government, you are now labeled an infidel and you are publicly hanged in the city square. That is what's going on today. In contrast to Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., in contrast to Mahatma Gandhi, those were essentially Christian cultures that believed in liberty, believed in freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, freedom of press, all of these wonderful freedoms. In an Islamic theocracy, you don't have any of that. You don't have the right to meet. You don't have the right to speak your mind. You do not have freedom of conscience. There is nothing in the bedrock to appeal to say we need to change. I don't know what's going to change Iran, but when you have that kind of enforcement and the military fully behind it, the police force fully behind it, where you can be a sharpshooter and you can shoot and kill a 16-year-old girl in the crowd. That means you had to have your sights directly on her and you had to pull the trigger. If you're able to do that, well, then you can quell any civil disobedience, you can quell any protest, and it will be impossible for people to come to freedom. But we can have faith in God. And let's pray and let's ask that God would change them and change their hearts. They would come to themselves and realize you can have a very prosperous Iran. You can have a full flowering of that wonderful civilization if you only allow it the freedom to actually breathe the oxygen. Without it, we're never going to see change, and we're going to continue to see the export of terror throughout the Middle East, and then once that's done, throughout the world.
سپاس از شما که توجه نمودید و این مصاحبه رو دیدید. اگر نظر و یا پیشنهادی در این باره دارید، درباره گفته‌های شاهزاده رضا پهلوی و بسیار قاطع جواب دندان شکنی به علی خامنه ای و کسانی که آرزوی ماندن دارند رو به گور خواهند برد. در کامنت ها منتظر نظرات شما هستیم. بدرود.